Um, a couple of things to think about with the pre-election developments. And what we want to do is we want to compare what we were looking at 4 years ago to what we're looking at today. And so one thing's for sure, the polling industry did a lot of research and they learned a lot from what happened 4 years ago. Absolutely, no doubt. As a matter of fact, the major national pollsters are not only making projections, but they're making projections about if we make the same mistakes that we made 4 years ago, it could go this way for Biden or it could go this way for Trump. So they've gotten pretty sophisticated. They know what they did wrong. And part of it is that they had no clue about the impact of social media, especially in the Midwest states like Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin. So first things first, these guys have gotten better. And so their polling is a lot more sophisticated. They're not just making projections, but they're also saying, if we messed up as much as we did 4 years ago, this is what could happen. If we mess up in Trump's direction, this is what's going to happen. If we mess up in Biden's direction, this is what can happen. So it's pretty sophisticated. And we can talk about the history of polling if you want to talk about that later. But apart from that, a couple of points, actually about 4 or 5 points. The number of undecideds today compared to 4 years ago, literally cut in half. So we had about 11% undecided last year. Vast majority, last year, 4 years ago, the vast majority of those undecideds went for Trump. That number has been cut in half. So today there's about 4.5%, 5% who are undecided. And more importantly, most of the undecideds who are no longer there, they went to Biden. So half of the undecideds have been cut out. Those ones who have been cut out are moving towards Biden. And so we don't have that big surprise from undecideds like we did 4 years ago. Another thing to consider is we do not have a viable or high profile third-party candidate. And no, Kanye West doesn't count. So think about it. We had Joe Stein. We had the former governor from Gary Johnson. And they siphoned off probably 1.5% to 2% in virtually every state that they were in from Hillary Clinton. That, for all intents and purposes, they drained drained votes from Hillary Clinton. Okay, so we don't have any viable third-party candidates. Third, Joe Biden's lead nationally is effectively double what Hillary had 4 years ago. And this includes in many of the swing states, not all of them, but many of them. So Biden actually has a lead, not just nationally, that is much higher than Hillary's was 4 years ago, but also in the swing states. So what we're starting to see here, putting all this together, is that things are really moving towards Biden winning. Now, whether it's a landslide, we don't know. There's a number of things that we're going to have to look at. But here's another thing. Hillary Clinton had very high unfavorable poll numbers. Almost 20% of the country, effectively, they were tired of the Clintons. And so almost 20% of the population didn't like Hillary. And a lot of it had to do with misogyny in the country, whatever it was, they were just tired of the Clintons. And so Biden has nowhere near those numbers of dislikability. It's not even close. And so in order for things to tip against Biden, it's mathematically it's possible, but at the moment it doesn't look so. Last thing, people were happy with where the economy was and where things were 4 years ago. Not so much this time. And more importantly, they're not happy, and they can look at Donald Trump's record. They had no clue about Donald Trump 4 years ago. And everybody was saying, hey, this is pretty good. Recovery's great. But let's give the new guy a try. People know Donald Trump now, and vast majority of Americans are not happy with the direction of the country. So with that big picture stuff, there's room to say that this looks like tonight's going to go Biden's way. And more importantly, it's not just the presidential stuff. We're also looking at Trump dragging down the Senate race and the congressional races, the House of Representatives. And so the expectation is that the Republicans are not going to be in charge of the Senate after this election. The exact number of Republicans who lose, we're not sure about, but my guess is if the numbers hold steady and expectations hold steady, the Democrats end up winning control of the Senate 51-49, 52-48, something like to that effect. There are a couple of big swing states we can worry about, but the Senate looks like, if all things hold steady, that it's going to go towards the Democrats. And here's the important one. In the House of Representatives, the Republicans are expecting to lose at least 6 to 12 seats and maybe even more. And if that happens, expect Kevin McCarthy to be ousted from his position and probably be discarded in the sense of he'll get probably the worst office in Congress, at least as a form of punishment. Who knows? But so that's kind of like the big picture stuff. There's a lot more going on. Any questions you might have, let's chat. I got about 15 minutes, so.
All right. I have questions, but I don't want to be the one to ask them.
All right. I'll wait for one of the students. I'll put the pressure on the students.
Maybe you could help us with I know. Maybe you could help us with the congressional seats and kind of putting that McCarthy, you know, what it was.
You're kind of fading out, Jennifer. Of all the connections,
what's the local?
Of all the connections, yours is the worst connection. Nobody else is fading out.
That's great to know.
So maybe you can type it out, and while you're doing that, your students can come up with a question, or I can continue just talking. I kind of do that for a living, but
I think Damien had a question.
Well, I guess it was just more into like city school district and like local elections and stuff like that.
I'm going to be terrible on that. I'm probably not going to be any help. I mean, unless you have more of a kind of conceptual, I don't think I'm going to be any help. So sorry about that, Damien.
You're good.
You want to talk about some of the local personalities who are running, like Alt and some of the others? Well, anyways, I'm probably better off not commenting.
Okay. I don't know.
Jen sent a pretty great one in the chat. She said, what will McCarthy's demotion mean to Kern County?
Well, probably not much. And the reason why is he hasn't really done much. It's been one of the, I guess, great frustrations of many people here that in Congress, you take an introductory course on American politics. One of the things you're going to learn is that congressmen and politicians in general don't really have that much to do in the sense of appealing to their constituents. But what they need to do is provide good public service in the sense of answering the phones, cleaning up the streets, and bringing home the bacon. So meaning when we talk about bringing home the bacon, it is, you see all the wonderful road work being done. I mean, I'm fed up with it already. We've been doing it for the last 2 years, right? But all the freeways, everything that's been tearing up and the construction that's been going on, well, that's Bill Thomas. He brought he brought home the bacon. He said, you know what, we need to redo the entire infrastructure, road infrastructure for Bakersfield. And that was Bill Thomas. You want your members of Congress or the assembly or whatever to bring infrastructure projects, things that are going to help with jobs, things that are going to help improve your lifestyle, things are going to do. Well, Kevin hasn't done any of that. Bill Thomas was good at that. And asking if we're going to miss it, no, not really, because he really hasn't brought anything home. And to the extent that, he's the minority leader and he gets to travel around, he gets to be seen with President Trump. If you're into fame, if you're into flamboyance, if you're into the drama of celebrity, Kevin's brought all that home. But bringing home the bacon, bringing home resources, projects, money, that hasn't been the case. And to the extent that he's maybe done a few things for farmers, et cetera, that's expected of him, of anybody in this region. And he really hasn't done anything out of the extraordinary that you wouldn't expect from anybody, Republican or Democrat. So with that, yeah, I don't think anybody's really going to miss anything if he's demoted. He will. He's definitely going to miss his position. You can tell he enjoys it. He's having summer vacation. He gets to see America on our dime. So, but yeah, I don't expect that we're going to lose out too much if he gets demoted. Is that direct enough? All right.
Other questions?
Maybe give me.
And let me actually preface all of that, just so you guys know. I actually like him. He's a nice guy. I used to have him lecture in my classes. And that was before he went into Congress. But he wouldn't mind having him as a neighbor. But he just doesn't work as a member of Congress. So, okay. Next question.
What about propositions?
Which ones? Depending on what.
Specifically, like the commercial tax. Let me see which one.
Are you talking about the one for
Prop 15?
So for which one?
On industrial, commercial and industrial buildings.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
there's a certain amount of.
Okay.
It was going to be charged for that.
Say that again.
The active.
I didn't hear that.
The taxes were going to be. Sorry, it was going to be the taxes were going to be charged based off
raised on facilities
the current
worth more than $400,000. I forget what the threshold. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Prop 15. There we go.
Okay. A couple of things on this one. Over now, it's 30 years ago, 40 years ago. God, I'm old. Okay. Over 30 years ago, we had Prop 13. And what that did is it redid the entire tax landscape for the state of California. In essence, it said, we cannot raise taxes on homes and facilities beyond a 2% margin, and it depends on where you were at, but let's just say it's 2%, 1.8% per year. Part of that was because part of this Proposition 13 came because America experienced inflation like we hadn't experienced it in years. This was in the 1970s. It was tied to OPEC price hikes and petroleum. Price of petroleum went through the roof. And because literally everything we have in this world country is tied to the price of petroleum, things got to be delivered, you have to be moved, etc. When the price of petroleum went up, the price of everything went up. So in order to deal with inflation, one of the things we said was, look, people are getting devastated economically because as we see inflation, the price of everybody's homes are going up 5, 10, 15%. And over 3-4 year period, that's a lot of money. And so what happened was that the taxes on homes and industrial facilities started to rise. And they rose faster than income or wages were rising. So this is where Proposition 13 comes in and says, okay, we get it. We need to pay our taxes, but home prices on properties, individual properties, meaning homes and industrial facilities, cannot rise more than 1.5 or 2% per year. That's it. If we get inflation at 15% and your house goes up in value by 15%, your taxes are only going to rise by 2%. Okay, this was Proposition 13. So what happened was that as we evaluate property, whether it's a home or industrial base, as these properties go up in value, higher and higher and higher, your tax base effectively stagnates because it's only going up 1.5, 2%. Okay, so over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, so a house that might have been worth $50,000 in 1978 might be worth $500,000 today, but their taxes have been rising by only 1.5 to 2%. And the only time that changes, the only time that will change is when you sell your house. Well, as you know, ordinary Americans move, they get new jobs, they get divorced, they get married, you get whatever. And so housing values nominally kept up because once you sold your house, your tax base readjusted upwards. So you would get taxed according to how much you paid for your new house. However, and this is the key point, when it comes to industrial facilities, things owned by corporations, because keep in mind, corporations can incorporate and they can create new corporation and they can transfer property, meaning they don't really sell it. So for example, Disneyland has been transferred over and over and over again. But guess what? Their tax base, what they pay, is literally pegged to effectively what they were paying in the 1980s. But the value of Disneyland in Anaheim, it far exceeds what they were paying in their tax base. So whether it's Disneyland or facilities in the Silicon Valley or Hollywood, these facilities have stayed within their corporate entity, even though new corporations might have bought the companies out, as was the case with Disney. And so what happens is that their tax base has not been elevated more than, let's just say, 1980 value of 1980s dollar. However, Disneyland, the land around Disneyland, the Silicon Valley where Google is, their property value has soared in value, but they're not taxed at what the value is in 2020. Those properties are taxed at what the properties were worth probably in 1990, 1980. So this cuts into the value or the money that local entities, local counties, local communities can receive to pay off the police, pay the police, pay fire departments, et cetera, et cetera. So local communities have lost effectively a big chunk of their tax base. Now, you're probably thinking, wow, I didn't think Proposition 15 was this big of a deal. What Proposition 15 does is it says, we've got to bring Disneyland and Google and all Hollywood, we got to elevate the taxes they pay and get them back up to where everybody else is paying. We're not saying, tax them more, but what we're saying is tax them what householders are paying, so that their properties keep up with what they pay in their property on their properties keeps up with the rising property values. So 15 is designed to help bring up these facilities to a tax base that is commensurate with what is actually owed or what their properties are actually valued. And I know that's a rather long question, so I'm sure I lost somebody there. So long story short, 15 helps to fix our tax bases, the tax bases that we have in local communities by having corporations pay in taxes what their facilities are actually worth. I hope that explained it. you're probably saying, I'm not going to ask him another question.
That definitely explained it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, can you repeat that back? Well, actually, as reporters, you should be able to repeat that.
I can give you a summary real quick if we need.
Okay. Anyway, so unfortunately, it's an occupational hazard, and I'm sure Professor Berger has told you that sometimes we talk too much. But if you have any questions on that, give me just let me.
Do you have time to answer one more question?
Oh God, look at time it is. I spent way too long on that. Yes. Okay, I'll answer another one. Yeah.
Okay, so Jen asked in the chat, do you think Americans are trusting the voting process? Do you think people will accept the outcome of the elections? If the Republicans lose as badly as you think they will they accept those outcomes or fight back?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. As a matter of fact, it gets into what the heart of democracy is in accepting not only our institutions, but our processes. And unfortunately, both our institutions and our processes have taken a beating over the last 4 years. And unfortunately, there are a good number of people who doubt both the institutions and our processes. They're very skeptical, and it doesn't help when the President of the United States is adding fuel to this fire. Fact of the matter is, people need to trust these institutions. We really haven't changed the way we do anything over the last 40 years. Ballots are counted. You know, all this talk about voter fraud, every single political science study that has been done since forever makes it clear that voting fraud is so small. Every one of you are going to win the lottery before an incident of voter fraud affecting election or you're gonna win the lottery first. You're going to be hit by lightning. You're going to be all of these things. Voter fraud does not have an impact on our elections. And so getting back to the question of, yes, many Americans today distrust our institutions and our processes. And it's unfortunate because the ringleader of that over the last 4 years has been the President of the United States. And so what was the second part of that question?
If the Republicans lose as badly as you think they will they accept those outcomes or fight back?
You know, that's a good question. I think you might see pockets of disgruntled individuals who go out and want to challenge the results. But I think the incidents will be more anecdotal and isolated. Now, however, if the president holds up in the White House and starts egging on his supporters with the stand back and stand by, for example, things like this, that would be entirely reckless and it would not help the situation. And then I think you might see more and more people going out into the streets and creating an ugly situation. It's one of the reasons why, you know, hopefully whatever happens is decisive immediately, although still not sure how that's going to go. I think Biden is going to win. And the margin should be comfortable, but whether it's accepted, that's an entirely different answer. So that's a good question. And I think everybody in America is holding their breath and they're hoping that everybody plays by the rules and everybody accepts what happens. You know, it's not just the United States. I think, you know, you read the papers around the world, headlines, and the world is holding its breath. Unfortunately, the United States is no longer viewed as the leader of the free world. That's probably Angela Merkel in Germany. And regardless of the criticisms we've had in the past, pre-Trump, I think the world understands that they need a united and free United States to keep the world operating and relatively stable. The ideas that founded this country and that people have built their lives around, including around the world, are ideas that still resonate. And as much as people like to criticize or march against the United States around the world, they also understand that there's a certain value, a great deal of value in having a leader that at least pays lip service around the world to ideas of freedom and democracy. And so I think the world is holding its collective breath and hoping that things get settled. And I can tell you, they're also hoping that it's not Trump. So. If you have a quick one, if you have another quick question.
I'm thinking.
That was a good question. As a matter of fact, makes me want to write an article.
Well,
There
I
you
have
go.
a question. I have a question to follow up because you were saying that the like voter fraud isn't really like something that people face and stuff, but how do you consider like you know how they recently tried to throw out a bunch of ballots in Texas and stuff like that? I know it didn't happen, right? However, do you think there have been instances like that or more instances like that that we know of?
And if there are, and there will be isolated cases, and, people will report that there are ballots that have been found. But the reality is that it's not widespread. This is not, the third world. And there are cases where people, are registered in other places. Let me give you an example. When I first came back, I taught in Mexico for years. Well, actually, I lived in Mexico for years, and I taught at the university there. And I was an electoral observer in the elections in Mexico in 2000 when they made the transformation from authoritarian government to pure democracy. But before, when I was working on my dissertation, I went to go live with my dad in Kings County. Most of you probably are familiar with Kings County up north, Corcoran. And I was writing my dissertation. So I happened to be there when it was time to vote, and I registered to vote. Well, I went back to Mexico, came back, got the job here, and then I registered to vote here. Well, lo and behold, my dad tells me, hey, you got a registration packet here in Kings County. And so I said, well, just tell them, send them a note, whatever. So I was legally registered to vote here in Kern County and Kings County. I sent them a note and I said, I don't live here, take my name off. It took me 3 election cycles with me writing. I finally had to call and say, I don't want to have to go down there, but if I have to, and if I do, I'm going to be pissed off. I've asked you guys for 3 consecutive electoral cycles. It had nothing to do with me, but technically, and you could even write this up. I bet you get great headlines. Martinez registered to vote in Kern County and Kings County. And that would make great headlines. And then I'd have to explain, but the reality is it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with what was going on in Kings County, because I tried to explain to them, and I did very nicely the first time. And then the second time I was a little bit annoyed. The third time I was really pissed. So it took them 3 times to take me off the voter rolls. And so legally I was registered to vote. And so, Damien, the question is, it's a good question. There are instances, and you will find them, where you have people double enrolled but it's not of a devious nature. It's not something that people often will go out and do. And matter of fact, the number of cases across the country, when they add all this stuff up, let me see, it's 0.0000600, and then they've got some numbers 656 of chances of voter fraud occurring in an election. Virtually nil when it comes to impacting the elections in the system. So does voter fraud occur? Yeah, 0.00000, and then whatever numbers come after that. But technically speaking, you could say that, again, Martinez was enrolled in 2 counties at the same time. Voter fraud. No, it wasn't. And so that stuff happens all the time. Dead people, people might submit ballots for somebody who died the previous week, or, whatever. There's a number of things that they do unintentionally. And so, but we know as a matter of course, it's in the political science, and even before this became an issue, that it's simply not an issue in the United States. So it's really nothing to worry about. And the cases you do hear about, it literally is people who are trying to cast aspersions or create doubts about the institutions or the process. And that's one of the ugly parts of what we're seeing right now. And when it comes to democracy in America. But it doesn't mean the system's falling apart. It just means we've got some bad stewards of government. So.
Thank you.
All right. You guys need to make political science your minor and take one of a few of our classes. I think you guys would probably enjoy that. So, all right. Well, this has been
We'd also love
fun.
to have some political science students.
Pardon me?
Oh, we'd also love to have some political science
No, actually, yeah, we should send them.
students join the runner.
Yeah,
So-
well, we need some people. You know what?
We could have a student exchange program.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate the fact that you're up at 7 and doing this stuff, and looking forward to reading the article. And yeah, you can quote me and misquote me. It's happened before. I know you won't misquote, but if it does, it's all right. Okay. Well, have a good evening, and it was fun, and do it again anytime.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much.
All right.
Thank you.
You guys, you'll have fun with Dr. Cargile. So, all right. I'll talk to you guys later.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye. All right. I'm gonna stop recording just to end that segment of tonight's class meeting.